Happy New Year and welcome to the World Extreme Medicine podcast. My name's Jen Sherman, a doctor, coach and expedition medic. If you're a paramedic, a doctor, nurse, physio, or indeed anybody working in healthcare who has a curious and adventurous mind, then this is the podcast for you. Today, we're going to be talking about mental health, specifically the role of adventure to mental health recovery. The pandemic has meant that we're all essentially living in a time of huge uncertainty. And it could be argued that as a result now, more than ever, it's essential to prioritise our own mental health and actually, even more importantly, know how to support others who are struggling with their mental health. So to explore this with me in today's episode, I have the pleasure of welcoming Stu Skinner. So Stu is an expedition leader and he's a director of a charity, Changing Horizons. And his charity is the leading provider of mental health first aid training in the outdoor and adventure industry. After surviving a suicide attempt, he embarked on a 4,500-mile cycling trip through Southeast Asia. And from this, his journey into wellbeing really began. So Stu, following from this, was awarded a fellowship from the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust, and he hiked 2,179 miles along the Appalachian Trail. He's completed an unsupported solo trek across the entire length of Jordan and has just returned, lucky him, from the Sinai, where he became the first person to successfully complete the 7 Summits Sinai Challenge. All of these epic adventures have been to raise awareness of mental health and challenge the stigma that unfortunately still exists. So before we dive in and we get into the conversation, I just want to highlight to everybody who's listening today that we're going to talk about topics that might be triggering for some individuals, and it's really important that we look after you and you look after yourselves. So if you are affected by anything that we discussed today on the podcast, please reach out to somebody in your network or to one of the organizations that we will signpost you to at the end of the podcast. So enough of my ramblings. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Stu to the podcast. Hi, Stu. How's it going?
Great, Jen. Thank you very much for having me on this podcast.
Brilliant. And where are you today? Where are you calling in from?
I'm actually calling in from France. I'm out visiting my partner who's living with her parents in the Dordogne Valley.
Beautiful.
She decided that lockdowns and being enclosed in a flat in High Wycombe wasn't really good for her mental health. So she's come to the remote countryside where she can live pretty much COVID-free and just, I guess, enjoy spending time with her family, which she doesn't often get the opportunity to do. So it's been lovely to come out here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, breath of fresh air, literally. So Stu, let's dive in. Let's dive in because I think we've got so much we can talk about today, really. But I wonder whether a great starting point for me and for the listeners is if you could just tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming an expedition leader and to setting up your wonderful charity.
I guess a lot of it has to do, well, it has to come from, I guess, a place of mental illness or mental unwellness and trauma. I went through a very traumatic experience, which, nothing in life had quite prepared me for. It still baffles me that, I had sex education at school, I had physical education at school, but I had no kind of emotional literacy or kind of mental health educational awareness. So when something did happen to me and I started having all these emotions and feelings and thoughts that weren't really my own, I would say, I didn't really know what to do. And I think that, the trauma got the better of me. And things got so bad, my depression got so out of hand that, I really struggled with suicidal thoughts. I was too afraid to say anything. People didn't really talk about mental health. This is going back 20 years. I certainly didn't know how to manage my feelings or emotions or my thoughts, and I kind of turned to self-harm. And, again, it helped. It helped with what I was going through, but it didn't really address the issues. And I went to university, which was good for a while. I got into a relationship, which was good for a while, but it was just kind of putting plasters over the wounds, so to say. And I left university without really knowing what I wanted to do anymore, because the career I wanted to work in the Foreign Office, I was told, due to my mental health diagnosis of bipolar disorder and depression, I had no career. And those suicidal thoughts and ideation really came back, and it was very difficult to kind of ignore. I was very good at kind of putting them off to one side. And I did make an attempt on my life, which was I was very lucky to survive. I was given the choice, quite tough love, of sorting my life out or being sectioned and going into an institution. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That can be life-saving for some people, and that might be what they need. But it wasn't what I wanted in my life at the time. And I don't know whether to fate, you might call it fate or destiny or the gods smiling on me. I had a friend who was volunteering in the Philippines with the Peace Corps. He's an American, and his service was coming to an end, and he was going to be on this big bike trip to kind of celebrate it and to travel through Southeast Asia. And he knew I was in a tough spot, and he just said, why don't you come on this bike trip? And it was kind of, that light bulb moment. It was that light at the end of the tunnel that I'd been told about, that I desperately wanted. And it finally gave me hope. And, I'd been pretty much agoraphobic. I had left the house in maybe 16 months. I was not working, not talking, completely shut off from life, which is so different to what I used to be, I flew out to the Philippines. I didn't even own a bike, didn't know training. And, 4 weeks later, off we went on this 4,500-mile bike trip. And I think where there was only kind of, like just despair and darkness, I finally found, that hope. I found my passion again. I found my purpose and reasons to stay alive, and just had all these joyful encounters with locals and, spectacular scenery. And it was just, yeah, I wouldn't say life-changing. It was also life-saving. It literally, I think it saved my life. And then I found out there was this thing called expedition leader. There was a career where you could take people on these awesome adventures and facilitate these experiences for other people. And I, just felt like that's what I had to do with my life. And so that's what I did. I went on an expedition leader course, spent a month in the mountains in Wales, did my mountain leader training, then flew out to Belize and spent 6 months out there training with jungle warfare instructors, working as a expedition assistant. And I was like, yeah, this is for me. This is what I want to do with my life. And yeah, it's led to a really richly rewarding career.
Fantastic. My goodness. And when was that? So when was that you began as an expedition leader? How long ago was that?
Well, I started in 2000. Well, bike trip was 2007. Expedition leader course 2008 to 2009. It didn't go smoothly, like most expeditions. There's no such thing as a perfect expedition, I'd say. And I was told by the instructor, who I didn't really see eye to eye with, that I had no chance as a expedition leader due to my mental health diagnosis, that organizations would not want to employ an expedition leader with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder who had a history of self-harm and suicide. And that really got me down, and that led to a pretty dark descent again. And I fell back, I relapsed back into depression. And then I happened to read a book by Bill Bryson called A Walk in the Woods about his journey on the Appalachian Trail. And this is for me. I applied for a fellowship with the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. I was very lucky that I received one. So I went out to the US, hiked over 2,000 miles to promote the mental health benefits of outdoor activity, but also to kind of prove people wrong, that that a diagnosis shouldn't be a limitation to achieving your hopes and dreams. And I think too often people with mental illness who've experienced depression, anxiety, and they're constantly told what they can't do, rather than with the right kind of help and support, you can still achieve your hopes and dreams. They shouldn't be barriers or limitations for you to do what you want to do with your life. And I think walking 2,200 miles not only proved to other people, but most importantly, it proved to myself as well. Kind of like I didn't have to listen to those people. I knew within myself that I had the the confidence and ability to lead expeditions and lead them well and lead them safely.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think it's raising such an important point, isn't it? That actually around the stigma, around actually if you've got a mental health diagnosis or you struggle with something specific in your own mental health, that people equate that to a lack of function or an inability to take on a role which involves responsibility or something, which again, I think, as you've proven, so beautifully, it is not the case. And I think it's a really, really important part of your story, isn't it? And I wonder if perhaps you could tell us then how the charity came about in and amongst this kind of, the story of expedition leadership. Where did the idea for the charity come from, and what is that actually involved?
I think I've always wanted, I think when people go through maybe experiences like I do, they want to kind of use it for something. And mean, for me, Martin Luther King was a big hero of mine growing up, and he said as his sufferings mounted, he realized he could react in two ways. Either he could react with bitterness or choose to transform his suffering into a creative force. And like Martin Luther King, I really wanted to transform all that negativity and turn it into something positive. And when I was in Belize working as an expedition assistant, we had a snake bite, we had loads of scorpion stings, perforated ulcer. But as soon as those things happen, as soon as those things happen, all the training kicks in, doesn't it? Everyone that's listening, I'm sure you as well, Jen. If there's a medical incident or a trauma, all that training kicks in. You just go into the zone, so to say. But we had young lads struggle with suicidal thoughts and self-harm. We had one young girl, the stress of the expedition triggered her anorexia again. We had panic attacks, anxiety, and spending 3 months in the jungle was pretty intense. And had lots of mental health incidents, and it kind of fell upon me to kind of deal with them or manage them because of my experiences. And it just baffled me. I was just like, why do we have first aid? Like, why did I know what to do when someone got bit by a snake? Why don't I know what to do when someone's having a panic attack or experiencing suicidal thoughts? And unfortunately, the young lad who experiencing suicidal thoughts, we had to repatriate, and that stayed with me for a long time because he was really upset. And I do believe that expeditions can be life-changing experiences for people. And I just came back thinking we really need mental health first aid. There needs to be a mental health equivalent of first aid. And then I Googled it, and I found out that the Department of Health had just introduced mental health first aid into England. And I did the course and decided that I really liked the course. It made me more aware of my own mental health, and it certainly gave me, I guess, maybe crystallized things I already knew, but also gave me kind of practical tools to I think better support other people. And I decided to become an instructor and try and drive mental health first aid into the outdoor industry. And I guess the charity was kind of a vehicle in which I could do that, because it was really hard to try and persuade people, especially people who work in the outdoor industry, yet to have yet another qualification, another thing that they need to do, and it also costs money, which it's not always hard to come by when you're a freelancer. So I managed to get some funding, and then I was able to run a pilot project. I was able to measure the impact and the benefits, and also the charities. It's my little baby. It's my little survivor's mission. It keeps me going when times are tough. I've always got that. Whenever I struggle with purpose or finding things, not things to do so much, but when work is quiet, it kind of keeps me focused, because I've always got that goal. I know what I want to do with it, and I think it's a vehicle that keeps me on the road, that recovery, that recovery journey, because I would never say I've recovered. It's an ongoing process for me, and the charity is really something that really helps me with that. And again, like I said, transforming something negative into something positive. So it's been incredibly cathartic, and it's allowed me, I like to think, to do a lot of good and a lot of what I really wanted to achieve with my life as well.
No, I think it's fantastic, isn't it? It's that it sounds like it's part of your mission.
Yeah, massively so.
Part of your mission. And I wonder, because I'm always surprised actually in the healthcare world how few people actually know about the public health, mental health first aid training courses. It's very interesting, because actually you would think the healthcare professionals would know about this, and actually many don't. So I wonder, just for the purpose of the listeners, whether you can just give us a bit of an idea about what a mental health first aid course is actually about. What as you as the trainer, what is it that you're what tools are you trying to give people through the course?
It really is what it says. It's a first aid approach, to mental health. It's not about becoming a doctor, psychiatrist. It's all about recognizing those signs and symptoms. Like in first aid, we don't diagnose, do we? We treat the symptoms as best as we can. And it's very much a first aid approach, so providing that initial support until we can get that person the more appropriate professional help. And for me, we often talk about the NHS in crisis. We talk about mental health crisis, but I think too often when it comes to mental health, we wait till we are in crisis. I waited till I was in crisis, or people wait till they're in crisis before they get the right help. With me, mental health first aid and kind of other mental health awareness trainings, if we spot the signs early, it allows early intervention. Early intervention enables faster recovery. So I think very often we can avert a crisis with that early intervention, and
Mm.
very often it can just be a simple conversation. And for me, that's what what I see mental health first aid really being about. It's about normalizing conversations about mental health. It's about saying it's okay to have these feelings. It's okay to share these feelings, and it's okay to get support and be supported around those, thoughts and feelings as well.
Mm.
But unfortunately, mental health conversations around mental health is still a bit of a taboo subject. I think one good thing from the pandemic is we are starting to talk about mental
Mm.
health. Even my dad, he's one of the most conservative people I've ever met. He's even started using that term mental health. So in some ways, I think it's been great to hear people talk about it. And went on the BBC today, and there's like self-care tips for lockdown. So that's great to see as well.
Definitely, definitely. And I mean, from your perspective, do you see these skills as being something that anybody can learn and anybody can become comfortable at having those, those types of conversations? Because I'm sure you've met through your training, I'm sure you've met a broad range of people, some who are much more comfortable with the training in the first place, and some who are, like what you mentioned with your dad, or maybe perhaps also come from a generation where it wasn't discussed. It just was not, it was the thing that wasn't discussed. I mean, how do you find people's response to that? And how do you find people kind of respond at the beginning of the course to the end of the courses?
Like you said, it can really be like, a mixed bag. But I think it's something that people really want to talk about, because we
Mm,
all have mental health. We all
mm,
experience mental health. And just like our physical health, ebbs and flows. And I think all of us have experienced low mental health at some point in our lives. And I think for many people on the mental health first aid course, it's, the first time in which they can talk in a safe environment about their own mental health, or the mental health of their loved ones. And I think that's what a lot of people tend to get from the course. So, the thing that you get most from the course is it gives them a safe environment to talk openly and candidly about their mental health, and that it's all okay. But like I said, it's
mm,
just because we're not used to these conversations,
mm,
and giving people 2 days to kind of explore and ask questions they might not normally ask, and maybe ask me about my own mental health journey. I think it gives them the confidence to then have these conversations with other people, because they realize they're not that scary. And
mm,
you don't need to be a psychiatrist. You don't really need to know what schizophrenia and bipolar disorder,
mm,
because it's just, the symptoms that people present,
mm,
and
mm,
just, empathy and listening. Because I think all of us, we might not know what bipolar is or what a manic phase is, but we know that someone might be scared, or they might be feeling low, or they might be feeling frustrated or alone or isolated. We can empathize with that. So I think that's what really comes through with the training, particularly with expedition and outdoor leaders as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And that has been a big part of what you've done, because obviously you do a lot of work for World Challenge and around mental health first aids. And perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about that and about the direction that that's taken.
Obviously, I work as an expedition leader for World Challenge, and it's a big part of managing my mental health. I get really excited. I love working with young people. I love taking them on expeditions. It's so important to my mental health, the way I manage it. But again, it was just for me the importance that, like if we're taking young people who might have, self-harming or experience of self-harming, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, that we have a toolkit so we can properly support them on expedition. If someone's got diabetes or, asthma, we make sure that we have, a first aid plan, a health action plan to support them. And I think it's really important that we make expeditions accessible to everyone, that we should, again, not
Mm,
putting barriers or
mm,
limitations. And again, mental health first aid it's a 2 day course just to add to their first aid course. And I think it was an amazing move by World Challenge to say, well, we value mental health so important. We think it's really important that young people are supported with mental health, and they made it mandatory for all their leaders,
mm.
which then meant I trained, I think, got over 350
Amazing.
expedition leaders and operational staff, but not just the expedition staff, the office, the managers and staff within World Challenge as well. And it was, yeah, I mean, it was tough because,
Mm,
talking about suicide. And I lost a young person who I took to Borneo to suicide during all this training, which had a profound impact on my mental health, as you can imagine. And that was quite tough to talk about suicide, having just gone through this loss. But again, it was just an incredibly transformative experience for myself, and just to give over 300 expedition leaders that, space, even if it just meant expedition leaders saying, sure, I have no idea what mental health is. I'm a little bit scared by self-harm. I'm a little bit scared by eating disorders, and just letting them know, well, that's okay too. It's okay to, but hopefully we can address those fears, and help you realize that it doesn't have to be scary, and that we can properly support young people with whatever the mental health journey they're at. Because again, as we all know, there can be incredibly transformative experiences for young people. So let's try and make sure we can support them best they can, so they can benefit just as I did, from my back trip in Southeast Asia. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about combining mental health training with expeditions, because I want people who may be going through what I did to benefit from that life-changing expedition that I went on as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're touching on something really important, which is this idea of inclusivity, isn't it, as well, in the industry, in the adventure outdoor expedition industry. This idea, you mentioned you experienced it when you received feedback at the end of your ML, assessment training, about your position in the industry. Young people sometimes receive messages that because of their mental health, they can't take part in something. Unfortunately, that still is the case sometimes. And I think that in itself actually just perpetuates the problem. I think what we really should be doing, and it's obviously my opinion to come through, is actually making this inclusive and saying, this experience could be the first thing that could help somebody on their road to recovery and to see themselves in a different light, depending on obviously what's been going on with them. But yeah, so, all fantastic stuff. So I wonder, obviously a big part of your journey, and we have touched on it before, up until now, has obviously been around suicide and suicidal thoughts. And I wonder if we could just spend a little bit of time just talking about that, because I think probably within the whole mental health kind of arena, it still is, I think, probably one of the most, people see it as one of the most difficult things to talk about still. So, I mean, what, perhaps you could share with us your thoughts around that, your thoughts around if we ourselves are struggling with something, some suicidal thoughts, we know somebody who is. I mean, what should we do? What in your kind of opinion, with your experiences and training of everything personally, what should we do?
Sorry, cool. I think first, I'm actually fine. It's not emotional. It's just
don't worry. Here, listen. No, don't worry. Take it, because this is all being recorded, and then we can just take a bit out of it. So
I don't know if you want to ask me. Really sorry about that.
No, don't worry.
No, it looks like I've been crying now.
Oh my God, no, not at all. And also, if we don't want to talk about that, we don't have to.
Oh, no,
what do you
I think
think?
it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I asked, because I kind of thought, because it's not talked about anywhere. that direct question, like, how do you, so do you want me to ask the question again, and then we'll just, because I'm going to listen to this afterwards, and then I just tell Nick, cut out that bit.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Whatever, you know what I mean? So I'll just ask again, and then we'll continue as we were. Is that okay?
That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you sure? Yeah.
Positive. Yeah.
Positive. Yeah. Just tell me if you're not, by the way. I should have said that at the beginning.
That's like, there's nothing that's off the books with me when it comes to mental health. So
Okay. So yeah, obviously we've touched on it already, quite a bit, Stu, just within your own journey and just within the mental health first aid training. But obviously, suicide and suicidal thoughts are, I still feel there's something that probably still has the most stigma attached to them within the mental health field. So I wonder whether we could just spend a few minutes kind of just to hear your thoughts on how we could, if we ourselves experience those types of thoughts, or we know somebody who is going through something like that, what we can actually do to support them.
I mean, for me, it's about normalizing. I don't want to normalize maybe the action of suicide, but suicidal thoughts are quite common. I think 1 in 5 people experience suicidal thoughts at some point in their life. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to act upon them and we can't really control what pops into our mind's eye. Thoughts pop in, thoughts pop out. Sometimes they're loud, sometimes they're quiet, sometimes they're close, sometimes they're distant. And I think when I first started experiencing suicidal thoughts, I was, terrified by them, but also I thought there must be something wrong with me, like I was a flawed person or flawed individual for having these thoughts, and it was something to be embarrassed about, to be ashamed about, something that I had to keep as a kind of a terrible secret. And I guess that goes back to stigma. And I think through, I guess, maybe music, and I started going to group therapy, and hearing other people talk about their experiences, you start to realize, that I'm not alone, that other people are having these thoughts and feelings themselves. And, if I speak my truth, that gives other people permission to speak their truth. So I think it's really important to realize that, if you are experiencing suicidal thoughts, you're not alone and there's nothing wrong with you, and that everything you think and feel is okay, that it's okay to have these thoughts. But maybe what's not okay is to suffer in silence. It's not okay to suffer alone. It's not okay to go through all of that by yourself, and that there is help out there. And I really want to stress that there is help out there, that, and again, if we start again, just take a risk sometimes and just ask the question, or just share how you feel. And I think for me, one of the biggest life-saving elements when it comes to suicide, and I guess first aid to suicide, is like, if you're ever worried about a friend, if they're struggling with their mental health, or they're using language like, I don't see the point in it anymore, or they're saying that I'm imagining I'll just be better off dead, or they're better off without me. If we start hearing people using like language like that, just say, look, I'm really worried about you. Are you thinking about suicide when you're saying that they'd be better off without me? Are you thinking about killing yourself? And again, that language I'm using, that might scare some people off, but I think it's important we use those words, because we can't beat around the bush. We can't be ambiguous about it, because a life may be lost. And I think a lot of people are scared to ask that question. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about ending your life? But for me, it's not just asking that question, it's also conveying a message, which is saying to that person, look, I really care about you when I ask that question. I'm also saying I'm okay with everything you're going through now. You can talk to me, it's okay. Even if it's suicide, it's okay. I really want, you to share what you're going through and share it with me. And if they do say no, then that's fine, isn't it? Like, we can carry on the conversation. But for me, it's always what's at risk. And I think as expedition leaders and medics, we ask the question, what's the risk? And if I don't ask that question, again, it could cost on their life. So for me, it's really important that we normalize conversations about mental health. If we're ever afraid of someone's mental health, that we can drop that question in. It's okay to ask it. And then it's kind of signposting them to kind of the right appropriate help, and just say, okay, maybe it's, good, we have a conversation with your GP. Like, why don't we go to see your GP? I'll come with you if you want, or find someone who maybe might be more appropriate to go with them to that GP. If the risk is imminent, maybe taking them down to A&E. I don't think people realize you can go to A&E for a mental health crisis as you could for, physical, if you've broken your arm. That's what one friend did to me. He took me to A&E when I didn't feel I could keep myself safe. And he did his job, because he took me into hospital. It may have taken me 4 hours to see a psychiatrist, but at least I was in the safest environment I could be, and he'd done his job. So
yeah,
I think, in a really convoluted way, for me, it's just about, these thoughts and feelings are quite common. A lot of people experiencing them. I think a lot more people experiencing suicidal thoughts at the moment. And there's nothing wrong with you if you're having these thoughts. And if you are worried about someone, just ask that question. Start off, how are you feeling? How are you feeling at the moment? How's things going for you during the lockdown? And if they don't sound okay, it's okay to ask that question. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you having suicidal thoughts? And the amount of people I said, well, actually, yeah. And just that weight that comes off their shoulder. And that's all they need. They just need that weight to come off their shoulder. They just need someone to share that with. And that's enough. That's all they need, really.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's fantastic, isn't it? There's so much in what you've just said, but I think it's so much about the environmental safety, isn't it? By even asking that question, you're almost creating a bubble of safety around you and that other person. You're creating this space where it can come out if it needs to come out, and it's coming out and being validated. And I think as human beings, we're so relational. We're made to connect. So when we're feeling at our most vulnerable, which somebody might be if they're experiencing suicidal thoughts, to be able to have that type of space and have a connection through that type of vulnerability, I imagine is just profound, actually, in terms of helping that individual to start to get better or recover. A change in tack slightly, what I'd love to hear more about is what role, like, for example, and you're just back from the Sinai, which I think our listeners would love to hear a little bit more about, but what role do experiences like that play for you in your own mental health and your own kind of sense of well-being, getting out and taking on all these amazing adventures for yourself rather than facilitating others' adventures through expedition leadership?
I mean, I think that raises a very important point. Self-care. Self-care starts with me. I've got to look after myself. Otherwise, I can't really be in a position to support other people. And I think sometimes I forget that. And I've got to, lockdown and the pandemic has really impacted on my mental health. I think I coped very well with to begin with, but things did become a struggle. And the suicidal thoughts and feelings, which I live with on a daily basis almost, but they're very often distant. They became louder, and I think I started to struggle with suicidal urges, and I was like, something needs to change. Like, I need to address this issue. And I see a counselor. I speak to a counselor once a week, and it's amazing. It's very helpful. I take medication. I see an online psychiatrist when I need to. So I was doing all the things I needed, but I just wanted to go and be in the mountains, to be perfectly honest, because that's been my go-to. Like, if I struggle with my mental health, I go to the mountains, I go to the outdoors, and it's just simple. I just think for me, it's the simplicity of it all that, I get up, I eat, I go walk, I summit a mountain, and you get that incredible feeling when you do summit, that feeling, that release. And it was just the peace and quiet of it all, not being bombarded with bad news every single day, and not having to worry about replying to WhatsApp messages or my email box getting cluttered up. I didn't have any of those worries or worries. For 14 days, it was just peace. And pure bliss. And I read more books in 2 weeks than I probably had done in the whole of the year. And it was just that peace of mind, and it helped me give, I guess, a sense of perspective, a bit more clarity with my thoughts, to rethink my situation, to kind of come up with ideas of what I could do next, how I could plan 2021. And just, again, I just think I think there's something truly healing about Mother Nature, and just being in that outdoors and that vastness, and feeling connected to something that's much bigger and greater than yourself. And just those stars, just, every night I just lie and just around a campfire with my Bedouin guides, drinking their incredibly sweet tea, and just like getting lost in the stars. And it was amazing. And it may have been only 2 weeks, but it was like, it was incredibly cathartic, and it did kickstart. And I feel like in a much better place now, to kind of take on 2021 and kind of find my passion and purpose to do what I have been doing. Like you said, just have something for myself. That was truly my experience, because I did go in with the idea of filming it all and blogging, and that went out the window at half an hour. I was like, I do not want to have this experience or experience this, this journey through a lens. I just ended up putting my GoPro in the very bottom of my pack and just forgetting about it for 2 weeks. So, and just challenge as well, just having, it was important for me to have a challenge. So I wanted to summit these 7 mountains. And again, that gave me that kind of focus and that purpose and that incredible sense of achievement at the end of it. It was amazing. And just that connection with the Bedouin guides, and you were talking about connection, just I didn't speak the same language. They could barely speak any English. I can't speak any Arabic, but it was just that, again, that connection I felt with the Bedouin, and kind of sampling their way of life, which is a lot simpler than our way of life, and really learning from them too. And I learned a great deal about myself through watching them as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, putting you on the spot, but could you articulate that about what you learned from your experiences with the Bedouin? Is there anything that kind of in particular comes to mind?
I mean, I've been living in my flat now for 16 months in High Wycombe, and I think only conversation I've had with my downstairs neighbour was to him saying, I think there's a leak in your bathroom, and me sending a note through his letterbox apologising for that leak. The Bedouin, even if there are different tribes, and we've got to walk, maybe 15, 16K through quite difficult terrain. If we bumped into another Bedouin, we'd sit down, they collect shrubs and roots and fires, and we'd sit down and we'd make tea and we'd have a conversation. There was no like haste, there's no like, oh, I'm too busy, I've got to get here, I've got to get there. They're always making time for each other. And it's just, the resourcefulness of them. I think we've, a lot of us have forgotten how to make fires, and we've got microwaves and, cookers and fridges. We didn't have any of that. So and water is very difficult to come by. So it's just, everything's kind of reduced down to its basic level, and nothing's done with haste. They don't rush, like everything was just, it's just the calmness about them, and just the focus, and I guess just the ease of way of life, which is also under threat. And for me, probably the most magical moment on the trip was at one point I was with my guide, and he just stopped and he just looked around him, and it was kind of like, he said, wow, but it wasn't quite wow, but it's something along that. And I said, even though you live here, you are of this land, I thought you still find this beautiful. And he said, like their way of life, when I'm in the village, and people are on their phones watching TV, I'm like a fish out of water. When I'm in the mountains, I'm like a fish in water. And that became our language for mental health. Because he's like, why? He was just asking, like, why are you doing this? And I was like, I said, because my heart and mind are like a fish out of water here, and after the mountains, when we summit a mountain, fish back in water. So that was a pretty magical experience as well. And it's just, I just was amazed that even though they're surrounded by this constant beauty, that even they stop and they pause and they make sure they take it all in. They never, they didn't seem to take anything for granted, which I often, I must say, I often do. So it was very powerful in that respect to me.
I mean, I think, actually, I'm kind of having a tingles myself just listening to that, because I think both me and I'm sure many of our listeners today will resonate with what you have just said, with the power of those types of experiences, and where actually language gets transcended. There's something, you find a way to communicate which is beyond a language, and it's so profound. And I think that's what that's certainly for me, that's what makes me love traveling, adventure, other cultures, expeditions, because it takes you out of your normal. It takes you away from the habitual way that we sometimes actually end up living our life here, I think, in the West, really. But it can happen so easily. And as you say, it's putting the fish back into the water, which is such a beautiful way of thinking. I love, it's fantastic. But I'm sure, yeah. But I mean, I think the hard thing at the moment is how, especially if, like you and me and so many of our listeners will be people who love an adventure, it's how you keep that alive at the moment, when actually this is just tough. Like, we're locked down again, you're maybe restricted to your local park if you're lucky. And, I think you've mentioned it quite a few times already during the podcast, this idea of purpose and how important that is. And I think for those of us that are into exploring and adventure, that's a huge part of who we are, of our value system, of what gives our life purpose, and what gives us our, essentially our life energy, if that makes sense, not to be too esoteric about it. But so I think, I guess, a question for you is how do you bring some of what you experience in the Sinai, and that, your adventurous kind of, your love for that, back to here, back to the reality of another UK lockdown for the next 4 to 6 weeks? How do you entwine that back into life here?
I think it was something that I really learned on the Appalachian Trail, because, walking 20 miles every day for 5 months, it can get very tedious and quite boring after a while. But then I realized it was all about my perspective. And, I truly believe that there is an adventure in everything I do. And it's just a matter of perspective. And I think our thoughts and our belief in our thoughts really create our reality. So if I think life is boring and mundane, then it will become boring and mundane. But if I think there is adventure in what I do, I mean, I don't know how, but I'm going to give it a go with this next lockdown. I'm going to try and see maybe the adventure in it, and again, and those things that I do and have taken for granted, to maybe not do that, as much, to kind of focus maybe on the relationships that I do have, and with people that I haven't maybe seen or heard from in a long time, and kind of rekindle those relationships from previous expeditions, like the two guys I ended up walking over 1,000 miles with in the Appalachian Trail. That connection I have with them has never gone, even though I haven't seen them in all those years. So just making sure, having conversations with friends that I've been on adventures, speaking to other expedition leaders. It's really important to me to stay connected to other expedition leaders, and have those chats. And kind of, for me, even talking about it can help me bring up those memories and those feelings. And so I think it's going to be difficult. We don't know what's going to happen this year. And last year was the first year in 13 years I haven't led an expedition. But like I truly do believe there is adventure in everything we do. I mean, if you're raising a child, that's most definitely an adventure. And running my charity, it's an adventure. Ebbs and flows, there's ups and downs. It's definitely a journey. So I think I truly believe there's adventure in everything we do, and it's just our thoughts and our belief in our thoughts and how we perceive things. I think that's the most important part for me. And that's what I think I've truly learned from all these adventures that I've gone on.
Yeah. So, I wonder, my kind of a question for you is how would you like to see your babies, essentially your expedition leadership and your charity, how would you like to see them grow in the future post-pandemic? What are your hopes for them moving forward?
I mean, for me, it's very much that I hope that mental health, and because there is a big disparity between mental health and physical health at the moment, and for me, it's very much that having a conversation about self-harm, suicide, or eating disorders is as commonplace as having conversations about diabetes, asthma, anaphylactic shock, heat exhaustion, and kind of making sure it is on that same parity, and that we take mental health as seriously as we do physical health and mental health on expeditions and adventures. And I'm doing my best to drive that through. And it's nice to know that movement is growing. There's a lot more people who are being vocal about it as well. And I just want to live in a world where people don't feel ashamed about their mental health experiences or diagnosis or conditions. And again, it's, feeling as comfortable talking about them as they would their physical health. That's so important to me. I don't know how many years that will take. It could take a long time, but like I said, that's my hopes and dreams, and I would do anything I can, anything in my power to help make that happen. And I think that's why it's really, it's fantastic that you're giving me the opportunity to have this conversation right now, because I think it's part of that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And what I wonder, I mean, I think you've already mentioned it during the podcast, is I'm a great believer in silver linings, but will this be a silver lining of the pandemic, that actually we come out of it and everybody actually is now going to be a little bit more comfortable talking about their mental health, because we've been united with the uncertainty of this time. And actually, as I think you've mentioned, so who knows, time will tell with regards to that one. But unfortunately, we are coming to the end of the podcast. I feel like we could keep talking for a lot longer. But I just, just for the last couple of minutes, I just kind of want to, first of all, just before we go back to Stu and get your kind of closing thoughts, Stu, I do want to kind of go back to what we mentioned at the beginning, which is obviously both Stu and I realize that we've talked about some sensitive topics today within the field of mental health. And if you have been affected by anything that we've talked about today, please reach out to somebody in your own network. And if that is not possible, we've got 2 resources that we really want to signpost people towards. And Stu, please chip in if there's anything else that you want to add around this. But the first one is an organization called Shout, which is a free, confidential mental health tech service. So it's 24/7, 365 days a year. And essentially, you text the word Shout to 85258. And there's some mental health support at the end of that text message for you. If you need any more information, it's giveusashout.org. So that's the first one. And the second one, which I think people will be probably maybe a bit more familiar with, I don't know, is obviously the Samaritans. Again, 24/7, 365 days a year. That's samaritans.org, and that's a phone number, and that's 116123, and you can call that at any stage. But Stu, anything else you want to add just around the signposting element of things?
I just also think it's really important that please don't be put off going to see your GP because there's a pandemic on. If you're struggling with your mental health, please go see your GP. Don't be put off because there's a pandemic and people, they're under strain. It's so important we still look after ourselves mentally and physically during all of this.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's a very important point. And it's quite funny that you mentioned that and me, I'm the doctor. I didn't think to mention that one. Oh dear. No. And also just we can get it right at the end, or maybe just now, Stu. Maybe I'm definitely seeing that some of our listeners today are going to want to be able to, are going to be inspired, very inspired by what we've talked about on your journey off the back of this podcast. So what is the best way for people to get in touch with you if somebody did want to contact you after today and have a chat?
If you go to the charity website, changinghorizons.org,
Yep.
I think my telephone number and email address is on that website, and there's also a contact form. So please do get in touch if you want to have a conversation, want to chat about mental health, and please do get in touch. I really appreciate that.
Brilliant. And I'm already trying to entice Stu to maybe be at the conference next year. So fingers crossed that we see more of you in the WEM community. So just, really for the last few thoughts, I just want to take it back to you, Stu. And we've discussed a lot today, but I just want, maybe perhaps for me and for the listeners, what are there one or two kind of take home points from what we've talked about today that you want to leave us all with?
I can't stress this enough. Like, for me, it's so important that we normalize conversations with mental health, and I can't expect that to happen with other people. It needs to start with me. And if I speak openly and candidly and honestly about my mental health, that gives permission for other people to do the same. And if you're ever worried about someone, if you just got to trust your instinct. If you've got a gut feeling that something's not okay, then please just start the conversation and see where it goes, and just trust your instincts. Like, I think there's a fantastic Samaritans advert, which is, it says, just a simple conversation is enough. Even a question about the weather can be enough to save someone's life, and that we all have the experience we need to save a life when it comes to someone with experiencing mental health problems or issues. And I think it's so important. Trust your gut and see where it goes.
Yeah, no, I think that's brilliant. Thank you, Stu. Thank you so much for what has been a very inspiring conversation for me, and I'm very sure it will be a very inspiring conversation for all our listeners. And it's just, thank you, Stu. Thank you, listeners, and Happy New Year, everybody. And see you again soon.